Hi everyone, and welcome to the Laude podcast. I'm Ashley Roberts, Laude's head of new TLD consultancy, and in this edition of the podcast, we'll be reviewing the ICANN81 meeting, which took place in Istanbul last week. My colleague Sophie Hay will kick things off with an overview of some developments in the area of DNS abuse. I'll then talk through the current status of the next round of new gTLDs and preparations for ICANN's new CEO taking over. Then I'll hand over to Susan Payne to wrap up the remaining noteworthy items from ICANN81, including an update on the election of ICANN's board seat 13. So I'll hand over to Sophie to begin with a summary of progress on the topic of DNS abuse.
Thanks, Ashley. So ICANN81 was a busy week for looking ahead on DNS abuse in the industry. So there were two main threads. There was Domain Metrica and also the Informal report. So we'll start with Domain Metrica. So Domain Metrica is an evolution of the Domain Abuse Activity Reporting, or DAR, that was first launched a few years ago. Metrica is scheduled for full release in early December, and users will be able to see some headline statistics covering the gTLD space. So this includes the total number of domains that are captured in the data, the number of those with current abuse reports, and a deeper dive into the various abuse categories of phishing, malware, and botnets. Users can also search for gTLDs or registrars to view statistical data for those entities. And they can also perform some limited comparisons with others, currently up to 3, but apparently there are plans to enhance and expand this. As with any new project, there are some bugs being ironed out, with Metrica currently being in a trial phase for just registries and registrars having access. So for instance, making sure that the data refreshes when switching from one TLD or registrar to another. There are also plans to remove spam as a category from the dashboard to reflect the current contract obligations of registries and registrars. In addition to this, registries and registrars will also have domains shared with them that are flagged by Metrica. However, this is not going to be the case for all other users. As of now, ccTLDs are not included in Metrica, but we saw that this was the case when DAR first launched as well, and eventually it was expanded on an opt-in basis. The other big development we saw in DNS abuse at ICANN81 was the publication of Informal. So Informal refers to Inferential Analysis of Maliciously Registered Domains project. It's a project between Core Labs and ICANN, and it uses data going back to 2015. The aim of the project is to try and understand why cybercriminals have preferences for specific registrars and TLDs for phishing. So interestingly on this point, I'll also note that unlike Metrica, Informal is not limited to just gTLDs. There is ccTLD data in this as part of this project. Informal finds that there is a relationship between price and abuse levels, with cheaper pricing being linked to higher rates of abuse. This is not to say it explicitly causes it, but there is a linkage and a strong relationship there. Further, the bundling of free services such as web hosting and DNS is linked to higher rates of abuse as well in the findings of the study. And Informal also found that there were lower incidences of abuse where there were pre-registration restrictions. However, the report does caution against identity verification as a blanket solution, recognizing that that could just drive identity theft. How the ICANN community is going to use this report is yet to be determined. Over the next few months, we can expect discussions on how ICANN is not a regulator and cannot set prices or regulate the offering of services using the DNS. We can also expect bulk registrations to be discussed, with Informal concluding that mechanisms that enable cybercriminals to scale their operations, such as volume, discounts, and automation, can contribute to registrars being more appealing to them. There is expected to be an ICANN webinar, hopefully before the end of the year, to further explore the Informal study with the community. So with that, I'll pass it back to Ashley Roberts.
Thanks, Sophie. So I'm going to begin with the main highlights from ICANN81 in relation to the next round of new gTLDs. You might be aware that the next application round is due to open in April 2026, and ICANN's been making good progress with its preparations for that. Just prior to the ICANN81 meeting, ICANN published its first draft of the new registry agreement that's going to be used for next round registries, and it incorporates changes from the agreement that's in place for existing TLDs at the moment. Those changes were subject of a fair bit of discussion at the ICANN meeting in Istanbul. Um, some of the changes are the result of policy recommendations, but other changes have been unilaterally inserted by ICANN, and it was some of these latter changes that seem to be the most controversial, particularly a couple of changes which grant or would grant ICANN new powers when registries are overdue with the payment of fees. During a discussion between ICANN and the registry stakeholder group, there was quite a lot of criticism of proposed new language that would give ICANN the right to terminate a .brand TLD if payment of ICANN fees was overdue by 6 months. So this proposed change was criticised as being unreasonable and also discriminatory against .brand TLDs over other types of TLD. We hope that this particular amendment was simply a drafting error on the part of ICANN and that they didn't actually intend to give themselves the right to terminate a .brand TLD in such circumstances. But we're waiting for some clarification on that point from ICANN. The other proposed amendment to the agreement that seemed to draw the most criticism is a new clause in which the registry would have to agree not to challenge ICANN's termination of their registry agreement for the non-payment of fees. So this proposed addition was criticised as taking away fundamental rights of a registry to challenge a decision which could potentially be wrong and would obviously have major consequences for the registry operator. Um, this is all part of an ongoing discussion on these proposed contract amendments that's going on between the registry stakeholder group and ICANN and will continue over the coming months. It's important to just point out that although this new agreement will initially only apply to new registries that come through the next round process, we do know that ICANN favours moving as many legacy TLDs as possible onto whatever the latest version of the registry agreement is. So we can expect that over time, some, if not all, of the new provisions will gradually be moved across to legacy registry agreements. So that means that these changes are important not just for prospective applicants in the next round, but also for any existing new gTLD operator. So it's a topic that you really should be paying attention to. Um, Separately, but also on the subject of the next round, yesterday ICANN launched two major programs that form part of the next round. One is the Registry Service Provider Evaluation Program, and the other is the Applicant Support Program. Taking the first of those, the Registry Service Provider Evaluation Program, it allows organizations that provide registry operational platforms to be approved by ICANN prior to the TLD application round opening in 2026. Most TLD applicants outsource the actual technical operation of their registry to one of these specialist vendors. So this program will allow TLD applicants to see a list of approved technical providers ahead of time. And then the other program launched yesterday, the Applicant Support Program, that allows prospective TLD applicants from underserved geographical regions to apply for financial support and advice and general guidance to help them make a new TLD application to ICANN. So the purpose of this program is to make the application of new GTLDs more accessible. And that program will be open for 12 months. I now want to turn to ICANN's new CEO. His name is Kurt Lindquist, and he's going to begin his tenure at the top next month. He'll be taking over from Sally Costerton, who has been the interim CEO for the past 2 years. With this in mind, at the ICANN meeting in Istanbul, the ICANN board used its face-to-face meetings with different community groups to solicit input on what those different groups think are the most pressing issues that the new CEO needs to tackle when they come into office. It's probably not a surprise that the different groups put forward different priorities that they felt were most important for the new CEO to tackle. But one priority, which was common amongst pretty much all of the community groups, was for ICANN to, or rather the new CEO, to conduct a long-term review of ICANN's financial sustainability. Now, this comes in the context of ICANN announcing a $10 million hole in its budget last year, which led to it making over 30 staff redundant and just recently announcing increases in the fees that they charge to both registries and registrars. So on the one hand, it probably wasn't a big surprise to hear criticism of some of that from registries and registrars because their fees are going up as a result. But there were many of the other community groups, including the likes of the At Large and the Security and Stability Advisory Committee, also clearly viewed this as a broader concern for ICANN and thus asked for the new CEO to prioritise, a proper investigation into the long-term financial sustainability of ICANN. So with that, I'll hand over to Susan now, who's going to talk you through some of the other important updates from ICANN81.
Thanks very much, Ash. Yes, I'm going to first off give an update on the Registration Data Request Service, or RDRS, where there were some interesting discussions during the course of the ICANN81 meeting. As you'll probably recall, this RDRS is the system that ICANN has built to manage the submission of requests for disclosure of non-public domain registration data, or what we previously knew as WHOIS data, and to transmit those requests on to participating registrars for them to consider the request, and if they deem it appropriate and legal to do so, to make the necessary disclosure. So the RDRS is a pilot effort. It's been envisaged to run for up to 2 years to gather data about the demand and to help the ICANN board determine whether to adopt the EPDP policy recommendations for the much more complex system for standardized access and disclosure, or SSAD, or whether to proceed in some other manner. So the RDRS has now been running for a year, with ICANN producing monthly status reports and data reports, which are then being taken as input into a group called the RDRS Standing Committee, which is a group of volunteers from the various community stakeholder groups, also with a liaison from the board, who's Becky Burr, and obviously supported by ICANN staff. The role of the Standing Committee is includes to assess whether there are trends from the data, whether there are specific lessons that impact the consideration of the SSAD recommendations. And ultimately, the role of that group is to propose recommendations that the GNSO Council will consider making to the ICANN board. So during the ICANN81 meeting, the RDRS Standing Committee did meet, and the chair of that group also presented an update to the GNSO in a separate session. As a reminder, the trial has reached a 1-year point here, and now it commenced in November last year. And although it's only at the sort of halfway point, there does seem to be a kind of general agreement amongst the Standing Committee members that it's time to start thinking about the recommendations. What's being seen is that the monthly data is fairly stable now, and I think most of those Standing Committee members feel that the next year is unlikely to bring any really new surprises in terms of the usage levels and the learnings from the pilot. So that's where there's some agreement, I think. It's not all in agreement. There are definitely different views as to what the usage data tells us about the demand for the disclosure of registration data. Unsurprisingly, the contracted parties have been asserting that the use of the RDRS confirms what they already knew about demand from the number of direct requests for disclosure that they were receiving. These are and the use of the RDRS is significantly lower than the number of WHOIS lookups that might have been done before the GDPR came into effect, for example. And so the demand from their perspective is in the thousands rather than the hundreds of thousands or millions or more. On the other hand, business, IP, and law enforcement interests have been arguing that the RDRS isn't really a good measure of demand because there remains both an awareness issue and also that usage volume is also directly impacted by the efficiency of the process. So how easy it is to use, how understandable the response you get back is, how worthwhile the received data is, the extent to which the received back data is about, say, a privacy proxy registration, and therefore doesn't at the moment disclose the underlying registrant, and so on. So nevertheless, I think, notwithstanding these differences in terms of maybe what the data might mean, the standing committee members certainly did seem to be very much aligned that now was the time to start discussing their possible recommendations. And both the chair of the group and the ICANN board liaison have also been socializing the idea that the full SAD system that had previously been recommended by the EPDP policy work isn't justifiable, that perhaps the RDRS might form the basis for any future system, certainly that the RDRS won't be turned off in the meantime, and that probably future policy work will be required because the policy that was adopted by the GNSO and sent to the board was for that much more complex system, and certainly much more complex than what is ultimately likely to be recommended. So I think we can look to see certainly more consideration of this in the coming months, likely to be at some point in the relatively near future a need to commence some kind of policy work, and just generally, even only at this 1 year halfway point, work is starting now on what are the recommendations that this standing committee is going to make about what the future of access to WHOIS data is going to look like. I'd now like to shift gear and just briefly talk about what's termed Board Seat 13. There are 2 seats on the ICANN board that are filled by candidates selected directly by the GNSO. One of those, Becky Burr, is the board member who has filled the seat selected by the contracted parties, so the registries and the registrars, for the last 8 years. At the AGM in 2025, so at the end of next year, she will term out, and the effort is therefore underway now to elect her replacement. So at the moment, we have 6 candidates who've put their hats in the ring. James Bladell from GoDaddy, who are the largest registrar, Keith Drazik of VeriSign, which is the largest registry and the operator of .com and .net. And then we have Edmund Chung from .asia, Greg DiBiase of the Amazon registrar business, Reg Levy from Two Cows registrar, and Jonathan Robinson from Identity Digital, who are both a registry operator and do also have a registrar business. During ICANN81, we saw an initial opportunity to hear from and question the candidates, and inevitably, with such a large slate, that proved to be insufficient time, and so there will be a follow-up this week with another session via Zoom, where the candidates can be questioned in a bit more detail. We can then expect the first round of voting to open in December, and the likelihood is that there will be more than one round of voting. It seems with that many candidates, it seems highly unlikely that there would be a single candidate in that first round who would achieve the level of support needed to dispense with the need for future rounds. But all in all, this process and the rounds of voting will hopefully lead to the selection of the board candidate around about April 2025, if not before. That's all from me. I will hand back to Ashley.
Thanks, Susan. That concludes our ICANN 81 update. We hope you all found this helpful. If you have any follow-up questions about anything we've covered today or anything else surrounding the ICANN meeting, you can get in touch with us by emailing us at events@comlaude.com. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.